A broke janitor inherits a worthless, burned-out cabin and becomes a town joke. But when he pries open the floorboards, he uncovers a secret that rewrites history and his future. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. This true story will change how you see lost causes forever. The laughingstock of Black Pine. The morning sun barely pierced the thick evergreen surrounding Black Pine, Montana, as Ethan Cole wiped his calloused hands on his faded janitor's uniform. The high school hallway echoed with the squeaks of his mop bucket, the rhythmic sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. At 42, Ethan had spent the last 15 years cleaning up after everyone else, scraping gum off desks, scrubbing graffiti from lockers, and pretending not to hear the whispers that followed him down the halls. There goes Cole. Bet he's still crying over that cabin. The word stung, but he kept his head down. It had been 2 weeks since the will was read, 2 weeks since he'd inherited the only thing his uncle left behind, a burned-out husk of a cabin in the woods. To everyone else, it was a joke. To Ethan, it was the first break he'd gotten in years. "Hey, Cole." A booming voice cut through his thoughts. Brad Hendricks, the football coach, leaned against the doorway of the gym, a smirk playing on his lips. "Heard you're moving up in the world. From a studio apartment to a pile of ash. Congrats, man." Laughter rippled through the small group of teachers nearby. Ethan forced a tight smile, gripping the mop handle until his knuckles whitened. "Yeah, real upgrade," he muttered. The bell rang, scattering the crowd, but the humiliation lingered. That afternoon, Ethan stood in front of the cabin, its charred skeleton barely standing against the wind. The roof had caved in years ago, and the walls leaned precariously, as if one strong gust would finish what the fire started. His uncle, a quiet man who'd spoken more to his books than people, had lived here alone until the end. Now it was Ethan's. He kicked a chunk of blackened wood, sending it skittering across the warped floorboards. "Some inheritance," he muttered. Still, it was land, and land was something. He stepped inside, the floor groaning under his weight. The air smelled of damp soot and pine. A few pieces of furniture remained: a rusted bed frame, a shattered mirror, a desk with drawers half melted shut. He yanked one open, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Inside, he found a stack of yellowed papers, brittle with age, bank statements, property deeds, and a single, folded letter addressed to him. His pulse quickened as he unfolded it. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're standing in this cabin, you probably heard the jokes by now. But there's more here than ashes. Look deeper." Uncle Walt. Ethan frowned. Look deeper? At what? Rotting wood and broken glass? He was about to crumple the letter when a floorboard creaked underfoot. Not the usual groan of old wood, but hollow, echoing sound. He knelt, running his fingers along the seams until he found a loose plank. With a grunt, he pried it up. Darkness yawned beneath. Heart pounding, he reached into the gap, his fingers brushing cold metal. He pulled, and a rusted iron crate, about the size of a shoebox, emerged from the shadows. The lock had long since corroded, and with a sharp tug, the lid gave way. Inside, nestled in crumbling fabric, was a single gold bar. Ethan's breath caught. He lifted it, the weight heavy in his palm. The metal gleamed dully in the fading light, and there, stamped into its surface, was an unmistakable symbol, a swastika. His blood turned to ice. Nazi gold. A twig snapped outside. Ethan's head jerked up. Through the broken window, he caught a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. Someone was out there, watching. The ghost and the gold. Ethan's fingers trembled as he turned the gold bar over in his hands. The swastika glared up at him, its edges still sharp despite decades of decay. His mind raced. How had this ended up here? Buried beneath the floorboards of his uncle's ruined cabin in the middle of nowhere? A cold wind whistled through the broken windows, snapping him back to reality. The shadow outside, had it been real? Or just his nerves playing tricks on him? He shoved the gold bar into his jacket pocket, the weight of it pressing against his ribs like a guilty secret. He needed answers, and the only person who might have them was long dead. The Black Pine Public Library was a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and lemon-scented cleaner. The town historian, Marla Voss, sat behind the front desk, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She glanced up as Ethan entered, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Well, if it isn't Ethan Cole," she said, her voice dry as a Montana dust. "Heard you finally claimed that cabin of yours. Find anything interesting in the wreckage?" Ethan hesitated. He'd known Marla since he was a kid. She'd been friends with his uncle. But could he trust her? "Just junk," he lied, sliding into the chair across from her. "Actually, I was wondering if you knew anything about the cabin's history. Before Uncle Walt owned it, I mean." Marla leaned back, folding her arms. Why the sudden interest? Ethan shrugged, trying to sound casual, just curious. Marla studied him for a long moment before sighing. "That land's had a few owners. Before your uncle, it belonged to a man named Joseph Meyer, German immigrant, kept to himself, died in the late 60s. Ethan's pulse quickened. "German? Marla adjusted her glasses. "Came over after the war. Rumor was he'd been in one of the camps, Buchenwald, maybe. Never talked about it. Built that cabin with his own hands." Ethan's stomach twisted. If Joseph had been a Holocaust survivor, why would he have Nazi gold? Marla's gaze turned shrewd. "Why do you ask?" Ethan forced a smile. "No reason." She didn't look convinced. Back in his tiny apartment, Ethan spread his uncle's papers across the kitchen table. Bank statements, land deeds, and a handful of handwritten notes in his uncle's cramped script. Nothing about gold. Nothing about Joseph Meyer. Frustrated, he pulled out the gold bar again, turning it under the dim light. There had to be a clue. Then he saw it. Tiny numbers stamped near the swastika. A serial number? He grabbed his phone, fingers flying over the keys as he searched for Nazi gold markings. Page after page of conspiracy theories and wartime records flooded the screen. But one article stood out: the missing Nazi gold train, $140 million loss in 1945. His breath caught. According to the article, in the final days of World War II, a train loaded with gold, art, and stolen treasures had vanished somewhere in Europe. Some believed it had been smuggled out, hidden by fleeing SS officers. But what if it hadn't stayed in Europe? What if some of it had ended up here? A knock at the door shattered his thoughts. Ethan froze. No one ever came to his apartment. The knock came again, louder this time, heart pounding. He shoved the gold bar under a stack of bills and crept to the door. Through the peephole, he saw a figure in a dark coat, tall, broad-shouldered. A stranger. "Ethan Cole," the man called, his voice rough. "Need to talk to you about that cabin." Ethan's blood ran cold. How did this guy know about the cabin? The man knocked again, impatient. "Open up. I know what you found." Ethan backed away from the door, his mind racing. He needed to get out. Now. He grabbed his jacket, the gold bar heavy in his pocket, and slipped out the back window just as the front door rattled under the force of a shoulder slam. The stranger at the door. The cold night air bit into Ethan's lungs as he sprinted across the overgrown lot behind his apartment complex. His boots crunched through patches of frost as he ducked behind a rusted dumpster, pressing his back against the cold metal. His heart hammered so loudly he feared the stranger might hear it. "I know what you found." Those words replayed in his mind like a death sentence. Who was that man? How did he know about the gold? And most importantly, was he alone? Ethan risked a glance around the dumpster. From this angle, he could see the dim glow of his apartment window. A shadow moved past it. The stranger was still inside, searching. His fingers instinctively brushed against the gold bar in his jacket pocket. He couldn't go back home. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The only place he could think to go was the cabin. It took him an hour to hike through the woods, every snapping twig making him flinch. The burned-out structure looked even more ominous at night, its jagged silhouette cutting into the starless sky. But at least here, he could think. He relit the kerosene lamp he'd left on the broken desk, its flickering glow casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Then he pulled out the gold bar again, studying it like a puzzle he had to solve. The serial number. That was the key. He dug through his uncle's papers until he found a magnifying glass tucked in an old envelope under the lens. The tiny numbers became clearer. A7713. A quick search on his phone confirmed his worst fear. That wasn't just a catalog number. It was a concentration camp tattoo. Ethan's stomach turned. This gold hadn't just been stolen by the Nazis. It had been taken from the people they'd murdered. And now it was in his hands. A floorboard creaked behind him. He whirled around, the lamplight swinging wildly. Uncle Walt always said you were smarter than you looked. A voice drawled from the darkness. A man stepped into the light, the same one who'd been at his apartment. Up close, he was even more imposing, with a thick beard and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He wore a heavy coat. But Ethan didn't miss the glint of a pistol holstered at his hip. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan demanded, gripping the gold bar like a weapon. The man smirked. "Name's Garrett Cole, and you're sitting on something that belongs to my family." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Cole, German." Garrett took another step forward, his boots crunching on broken glass. "See, my grandfather was SS, stationed at Buchenwald. When the war ended, he didn't just run, he took payment for his services." He nodded at the gold in Ethan's hand. "That's mine by blood right." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just about money. This was about history, about justice. "Your grandfather was a monster," he spat. Garrett's smirk vanished. "And yours was a thief. Joseph Meyer stole from us. Then your uncle hid it. And now," he drew his pistol, "now you're going to tell me where the rest of it is." Blood and secrets. The barrel of Garrett Cole's pistol gleamed in the flickering lamplight, its darkness deeper than the shadows of the ruined cabin. Ethan's mouth went dry. He'd never had a gun pointed at him before. The reality of it froze his lungs mid-breath. "That gold belongs to my family," Garrett repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "And you're going to tell me where the rest of it is." Ethan's fingers tightened around the ingot in his pocket. The weight of it, the history of it, suddenly felt heavier. This wasn't just treasure. It was blood money, stolen from people who'd been reduced to numbers. People like A7713. "I don't know where the rest is," Ethan said, forcing his voice steady. Garrett's finger twitched against the trigger. "Bullshit. Your uncle knew. That's why he left you the cabin." He took another step forward, close enough that Ethan could smell the stale tobacco on his coat. "Now think real hard, Janitor, or this ends messy." A drop of sweat slid down Ethan's temple. His eyes darted to the broken window behind Garrett. Too far to reach. To the fireplace poker leaning against the wall, just out of grasp. Then he remembered the loose floorboard. "Okay," Ethan said, holding up his free hand in surrender. "Okay, I'll show you." Garrett's grin returned, all teeth and no warmth. Smart man. Ethan moved slowly, keeping his movements obvious as he knelt near the spot where he'd found the crate. His fingers brushed the warped wood, searching for the edge of the loose plank. But he wasn't reaching for gold. Beneath the floorboards, half buried in dirt, was his uncle's old hunting knife. Garrett leaned closer, his breath hot on Ethan's neck. "Hurry it up." In one fluid motion, Ethan yanked the knife free and swung. The blade caught Garrett across the forearm, drawing a dark line of blood. He roared in pain, the pistol discharging into the ceiling with a deafening crack. Would splinters rain down as Ethan scrambled backward, heart pounding. "You little shit." Garrett clutched his bleeding arm, his face twisted in rage. Ethan didn't wait. He bolted for the door, crashing through the rotting frame into the moonlit woods. Branches lashed at his face as he ran, his boots slipping on wet leaves. Behind him, Garrett's curses echoed through the trees. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. Only then did he collapse behind a fallen oak, gasping for air. He was alive. For now. But Garrett wouldn't give up. And Ethan still had no answers. Only more questions. Why had his uncle hidden the knife there? And what else was buried beneath that cabin? The historian's secret. The first light of dawn found Ethan shivering behind Marla Voss's garden shed, his breath coming in ragged puffs of steam. He'd spent the night moving through the woods like a ghost, jumping at every snapped twig, convinced Garrett's gun would find him in the dark. Now, As the sky paled to gray, he watched the historian's cottage through bloodshot eyes, weighing his options. Marla was his last hope. But could he trust her? A curtain twitched in the upstairs window. Ethan ducked lower, his ribs protesting from the night's exertion. He needed help, medical supplies, answers. But most of all, he needed to understand why his uncle had died with the secret. The back door creaked open. Ethan Cole. Marla's voice cut to the morning quiet. If you're going to lurk in my azaleas, you might as well come inside before you catch pneumonia. Ethan froze. I can see your boot prints in the frost, she added dryly. And Lord knows no one else would be stupid enough to hide in my yard at this hour. Defeated, Ethan stood, his muscles screaming in protest. Marla waited on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. She looked like she'd been expecting him. The kitchen smelled of strong coffee and something cinnamon baking in the oven. Marla pushed a steaming mug toward Ethan as he slumped at her oak table. Start talking, she said. The warmth of the mug seeped into Ethan's aching hands as the story spilled out. The gold bar, the serial number, Garrett Cole's sudden appearance. When he got to the part about the knife fight, Marla's eyes flicked to the fresh cut on his temple, but she didn't interrupt. When he finished, the old clock above the stove ticked through 10 full seconds of silence. Then Marla stood abruptly and walked to a locked cabinet beside the refrigerator. The key came from a chain around her neck. Inside were files, old, yellowed papers carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. She dropped one on the table in front of Ethan, a photograph, black and white, edges frayed. It showed a group of emaciated men in striped uniforms standing behind barbed wire. One face had been circled in faint pencil. Ethan's breath caught. The man in the circle had his uncle's eyes. That's Walt, Marla said quietly. Age 19. Buchenwald, 1944. The room tilted. Ethan's fingers trembled as he traced a faded image. His uncle, proud, quiet Uncle Walt who'd taught him to fish, who'd never raised his voice, had been a prisoner of the Nazis. But he never... Ethan's throat closed around the words. Of course he didn't tell you. Marla's voice softened. Men like Walt didn't talk about those things. Not even a family. Ethan stared at the photograph, his vision blurring. All these years, he'd thought his uncle was just another quiet Montana loner. Not a survivor. Not a man who'd carried this horror inside him every day. Marla slid another document across the table. A faded newspaper clipping from 1947. The headline read, Local hero helps capture Nazi war criminal. Below it was a grainy photo of a younger Walt standing beside soldiers. After the war, Marla explained, Walt worked with the Allies to track down SS officers who'd escaped. That's how he met Joseph Meyer. They were connected. Ethan's head snapped up. Connected how? Marla hesitated. Then she removed one final item from the cabinet. A small leather journal, its cover cracked with age. This was Joseph's, she said. Walt gave it to me for safekeeping before he died. I think he knew this day would come. Ethan reached for the journal, but Marla's hand closed over his. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Before you open this, she warned, you need to understand something. That gold isn't just treasure. It's evidence. And the men who hid it, their descendants are still out there, still dangerous. Outside, a car engine growled to life somewhere down the street. Ethan met Marla's gaze. Like Garrett Cole. She nodded grimly. Like Garrett Cole. The journal fell open to a folded map tucked between the pages. Brittle with age, it showed the mountains around Black Pine with several locations marked in faded red ink. And at the center of it all, the burned-out cabin. The map to hell. The brittle pages of Joseph Meyer's journal crackled under Ethan's fingertips as he spread the map across Marla's kitchen table. The faded red ink formed a spiderweb of lines radiating from the cabin, connecting to half a dozen locations deep in the Black Pine wilderness. These are old mining tunnels, Marla said, tracing one winding path with her knuckle. Most collapsed decades ago. Your uncle used to say they were death traps. Ethan studied the central mark, a small black X right beneath the cabin's location. Then why would Joseph hide gold there? Marla's lips pressed into a thin line. She flipped to the journal's last written page, where a single paragraph stood out in jagged handwriting. They think I stole it, but I saved it, one piece at a time, where no SS dog will ever find it. Let the mountains keep their secrets. A car door slammed outside. Both of them froze. Through the lace curtains, Ethan saw a dark SUV idling at the curb. The driver's side was empty. Marla moved first, snatching the journal and map from the table. Back door. Now. Ethan barely had time to grab his jacket before she was shoving him toward the rear exit. What about you? I've survived worse than Nazi grandchildren, she hissed, thrusting a flashlight into his hands. Go to the old ranger station off Bear Creek Road. Wait for me there. The front door rattled under heavy knocking. Ethan didn't argue. He slipped out just as a man's voice called, Mrs. Voss? We need to talk about Ethan Cole. The we sent a chill down his spine. Garrett had brought reinforcements. The woods behind Marla's property blurred as Ethan ran, branches whipping at his face. Bear Creek Road was 5 miles east, an abandoned Forest Service outpost even locals forgot about. Perfect for hiding, if he could reach it. His boots splashed through icy streams as he followed the terrain from memory. The map burned in his mind, those red lines converging on the mountains. How much gold was out there? And how many people would kill for it? A gunshot cracked through the trees. Ethan dug behind a fallen log, heart hammering. Had they followed him? Or was that just a hunter? Silence. Then leaves crunching. Close. He held his breath, fingers digging into damp earth. The footsteps passed within yards of his hiding spot, moving northwest. Away from him. For now. It took another hour of cautious movement to reach the crumbling ranger station. The single-room building leaned dangerously, its porch sagging under decades of neglect. Ethan slipped inside, the smell of mildew and rodent droppings thick in the air. No Marla. He checked his phone. No service. Of course. The journal felt heavy in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out, flipping past Joseph's cramped German script until a folded photograph slipped free. 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a snow-dusted mountain. Ethan recognized his uncle immediately, younger, healthier, but with the same quiet intensity in his eyes. Beside him stood a gaunt man Ethan assumed was Joseph. The third man made his blood run cold. Tall, blond, a jagged scar running from eyebrow to jawline. The spitting image of Garrett Cole. On the back, in Walt's handwriting, H. Cole thinks we're partners. Doesn't know we're hunting him. Ethan's hand shook. This wasn't just about stolen gold. His uncle and Joseph had been Nazi hunters, and now the hunter's grandson had become the prey. A floorboard creaked outside. Ethan snapped the journal shut. Too late to run. The door flew open, but it wasn't Garrett. Marla stood silhouetted in the fading light, her left eye swollen shut, blood trickling from her split lip. She clutched a pistol in one shaking hand. They're coming, she gasped, and they brought the whole damn family. Blood in the snow. The metallic taste of fear coated Ethan's tongue as he helped Marla inside the ranger station. Her breathing came in ragged gasps, each exhale puffing white in the freezing air. The pistol trembled in her grip, but her eyes burned with grim determination. Cole's son and 2 cousins, she wheezed, pressing a bloody handkerchief to her split lip. Found them going through my files. Bastards know about the mines. Ethan barred the door with a rusted iron stove, his mind racing. 4 armed men against 1 injured woman, and a janitor with a hunting knife. The math wasn't encouraging. Outside, the first snowflakes of an approaching storm began spiraling down. Marla grabbed his arm with surprising strength. The photograph, you saw it? At Ethan's nod, her grip tightened. Hans Cole wasn't just some fleeing SS officer. He was the accountant. Knew where every gold bar from Buchenwald went. A engine's growl cut through the gathering storm. Headlights flickered between the trees, maybe half a mile down the mountain road. No time. Marla shoved the pistol into Ethan's hands. You ever fire one of these? High school shooting range. Ethan lied. The weight felt foreign, dangerous. Marla's chuckle turned into a wet cough. Point and pray, then. She pressed something cold into his other hand. A rusted key on a leather cord. Old mine elevator. Gets you to the lower tunnels fast. The headlights grew brighter. A door slammed. Then another. Ethan's pulse hammered in his throat. We're not both making it out of here, are we? Marla's smile held decades of sorrow. Walt was my brother-in-law, married my sister Anna in '52. She adjusted the pistol in Ethan's grip with practiced ease. Now, get to that mine. Finish what they started. The first bullet shattered the window before Ethan could respond. With splinters exploded as automatic gunfire chewed through the station's walls. Ethan hit the floor, dragging Marla behind the overturned table. Return fire wasn't an option. They were pinned. Back window. Marla shouted over the gunfire. When Ethan hesitated, she shoved him hard. Go! Another volley ripped through the cabin. Something hot grazed Ethan's shoulder as he tumbled through the broken window into the snow. Behind him, Marla's pistol barked 3 times, buying him seconds. The woods swallowed him whole. Branches tore at his clothes as he ran blindly downhill, following the sound of rushing water. Bear Creek. The mine entrance lay just beyond it. A different sound cut through the night. A single gunshot, final and absolute. Ethan's breath hitched, but he didn't stop running. Couldn't. The abandoned mine yawned before him. Its entrance half collapsed. The elevator Marla mentioned hung suspended over a black abyss, its cables creaking in the wind. Ethan jammed the key into the rusted control box. With a shudder, the ancient machinery groaned to life. Footsteps crunched through snow behind him. Ethan spun as Garrett Cole emerged from the trees, his father's Luger gleaming in the moonlight. Blood streaked the man's parka, not his own. The historian died well, Garrett sneered. For a traitor. The elevator cables screamed in protest as the platform began descending. Ethan raised Marla's pistol, only to find the chamber empty, spent. Garrett's laugh echoed off the canyon walls. God smiles on the righteous. A gunshot roared, but the pain never came. Instead, Garrett staggered forward, his expression morphing into confusion. A dark stain bloomed between his shoulder blades. He collapsed face first into the snow, revealing Marla leaning against a pine tree 20 yards back, a rifle smoking in her hands. Told you, I'd survived worse, she gasped before her legs gave out. The elevator dropped another foot, its cables snapping one by one. Ethan made his choice in a heartbeat. He sprinted to Marla, hauling her over his shoulders as the last cable gave way with a metallic shriek. Together, they plunged into darkness. Bones of the mountain. The elevator's final cable snapped with a sound like a gunshot. For one terrifying second, Ethan and Marla were weightless, the platform shuddering beneath them as it plunged into the abyss. The darkness swallowed them whole, broken only by the sparks screaming from the guide rails. Ethan's stomach lurched into his throat as he clutched Marla tighter, bracing for the impact that would crush them both. Then, with a bone-jarring screech, the elevator slammed to a stop. Ethan's teeth rattled in his skull. The platform groaned, swaying drunkenly on its last frayed cable. Around them, the shaft yawned into blackness, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. Marla stirred against him, her breath shallow. Still alive? She rasped. Barely. Ethan gasped. His shoulder burned where the bullet had grazed him, and his legs trembled from the adrenaline. The elevator shuddered again, tilting dangerously. They didn't have long. A dim light flickered somewhere below, a single, ghostly bulb swinging from a wire, illuminating a tunnel mouth carved into the rock. There, Ethan said, hauling Marla to her feet. We jump. Marla's laugh was more of a wheeze. You first. The gap was less than 5 feet, but the drop was endless. Ethan hesitated only a second before leaping, his boots skidding on loose rock as he landed. He turned just in time to see Marla stumble forward as the elevator gave one final groan and dropped into the void. The crash echoed up the shaft like thunder. Marla collapsed against the tunnel wall, her face ashen. Blood seeped through her coat where a bullet had clipped her side. Go, she muttered, before they follow. Ethan shook his head. Not without you. He looped her arm over his shoulders, half dragging her into the tunnel. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, the walls slick with moisture. The single bulb faded behind them, leaving only the weak beam of Ethan's flashlight cutting through the dark. Then the tunnel opened into a cavern. Ethan's breath caught. Crates, dozens of them, stacked against the walls. They were rotted but still bearing the faded black insignia of the Third Reich. Some had split open, spilling their contents onto the stone floor. Tarnished silverware, moldering paintings, and in one shattered crate, the unmistakable glint of gold bars. But that wasn't what made Ethan's blood run cold. In the center of the cavern, a skeletal figure sat slumped against a rusted shovel, the tattered remains of an SS uniform clinging to its bones. A rusted pistol lay in its lap, one bony finger still curled around the trigger. Hans Cole, Marla's grip on Ethan tightened. He never left. Ethan stepped closer, his flashlight trembling. Something glinted around the skeleton's neck, a dog tag. He reached for it, brushing away decades of dust. The metal was stamped with a name, a rank, and a single, chilling word: Werder, traitor. A noise echoed from the tunnel behind them. Boots on rock. Garrett's voice carried through the darkness, raw with fury. Cole. Marla grabbed Ethan's arm. There's another way out. Joseph's notes mentioned an air shaft. Ethan swept the flashlight across the cavern, the beam catching on a narrow fissure in the far wall, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The first gunshot ricocheted off the stone, beside his head. Run! Marla shoved him forward as another bullet sparked off the crates. Ethan duffed the fissure, dragging Marla after him. The rock scraped his shoulders as he squeezed through, the sound of Garrett's enraged screams following him into the dark. Somewhere ahead, a faint breeze stirred, the promise of open air, and somewhere behind, the echoes of a truth buried too long. The traitor's legacy. The fissure walls pressed against Ethan's ribs like a stone vise as he squeezed through the narrow passage. Behind him, Marla's labored breathing echoed in the tight space, each exhale a shuddering reminder the bullet wound in her side. The flashlight beam bounced off jagged rock, revealing occasional scratch marks, decades-old grooves left by desperate hands. Joseph came this way, Marla panted. These marks! He carved them as he fled. Ethan's fingers brushed over the notches in the stone. 3 vertical lines, then a 4th crossing through them. A prisoner's count, a survivor's tally. A gunshot exploded behind them, the sound magnified in confined space. Rock chips stung Ethan's neck as Garrett's voice roared through the tunnel. You think you can steal from me? For my blood. Another bullet whined past Ethan's ear. He ducked instinctively, his shoulders slamming against the rock wall. The impact sent a jolt of pain through his still bleeding wound. The fissure opened suddenly, spilling them into a vertical shaft barely 3 feet wide. Rusted rungs laddered up one side, an old air vent leading to the surface. Moonlight filtered from somewhere high above. Go! Marla gasped, pressing a hand to her bleeding side. I'll hold him off. Ethan shook his head. Not happening. He grabbed her arm, hauling her toward the ladder. You first. Marla's eyes locked onto his. In the dim light, they held the same fierce determination he'd seen in his uncle's photograph. Ethan, listen to me. That gold isn't just treasure. Hans Cole didn't die protecting it. He died rejecting it. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Ethan boosted Marla onto the first rung, her weight making the ancient metal groan. As she climbed, he turned back toward the fissure, his flashlight beam illuminating the glint of Garrett's pistol first, then the man himself. Face streaked with sweat and fury, his grandfather's Luger raised. You don't understand what this is, Garrett snarled. This is justice. What's owed to my family? Ethan stood his ground, the truth crystallizing in his mind. Your grandfather was executed as a traitor. He chose this. He gestured to the cavern behind them. He could have taken the gold and run, but he didn't. Garrett's trigger finger twitched. Liar. The gunshot never came. Instead, a deep groan shuddered through the mountain. Above them, the shaft trembled, sending chunks of rock cascading down. Decades of neglect had left the tunnels unstable, and the gunfire had shaken loose what little integrity remained. The ceiling collapsed in a roar of stone and dust. Ethan lunged to the ladder as the world dissolved into chaos. The last thing he saw was Garrett Cole's face, not in anger, but in dawning horror, as the mountain swallowed him whole. Then darkness. Consciousness returned in fragments. Cold air on his face. Marla's voice, distant but insistent. The taste of blood and dirt. Ethan blinked up at a sky streaked with dawn. His body sprawled on a rocky outcrop halfway down the mountain. Marla crouched beside him, her face a mask of blood and exhaustion. Behind them, a plume of dust rose where the mine entrance had been. Now just a pile of boulders. "It's over," Marla whispered. But as Ethan sat up, pain lancing through his ribs, he knew it wasn't true. The gold was still down there. The history, the blood, and choices still to be made. What the ashes left behind. The morning sun painted the burned-out cabin in pale gold as Ethan pushed open the warped door one last time. A week had passed since the mine collapsed, since Garrett Cole and his twisted legacy had been buried under tons of rock. The authorities had called it a tragic hiking accident. Ethan hadn't corrected them. Now, with Marla recovering in the county hospital and the town buzzing with rumors, he stood in the skeleton of his uncle's home, running his fingers along the soot-stained walls. There was something he'd missed, something his uncle had left for him. The loose floorboard creaked underfoot. Kneeling, Ethan pried it up with his hunting knife, revealing not gold or weapons this time, but a small tin box, its surface blackened by smoke but intact. Inside lay a single envelope, yellow with age but untouched by the flames that had consumed the cabin. His name in Uncle Walt's steady hand. Ethan's breath caught as he unfolded the letter. "Ethan, if you're reading this, you found what Joseph and I hid, and you've learned the truth about Hans Cole. That gold was never ours to take. It belonged to the people those monsters turned into numbers. So we did the only thing we could. We made sure no one would ever profit from their suffering. The mine entrance is sealed. The map's burned. What little we kept as evidence is buried where only the righteous would think to look. I'm sorry I never told you about the camps, about the tattoos. Some wounds never heal, son. But watching you grow into a good man, that helped. Be better than we were. Uncle Walt." Ethan's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the weight of his uncle's secret settling over him like snowfall. All these years, Walt hadn't just been a quiet man. He'd been a soldier in a war that never really ended. A glint caught his eye beneath the letter. A small key, attached to a tag stamped with numbers. Not a bank key, not a safety deposit box. A locker at the Greyhound station in Missoula. The bus terminal smelled of stale coffee and diesel fuel. Locker 217 opened with a metallic clunk, revealing a single leather-bound ledger. Ethan flipped it open to the first page, his pulse quickening. Names. Hundreds of them. Next to each, dates, camp numbers, and, where possible, locations of surviving family. Hans Cole's meticulous records of stolen lives. The final page held a note in Joseph Meyer's spidery handwriting. For when the world is ready to remember. Ethan closed the book gently. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted across the parking lot. A payphone stood against the far wall. He knew what came next. The New York Times headline 6 weeks later read, "Holocaust Survivor's Diary Leads to Recovery of Stolen Artifacts." The article mentioned an anonymous donor who provided crucial documentation. It made no mention of gold, or mines, or the unmarked grave where 3 Nazi hunting veterans had buried their greatest secret. In Black Pine, Ethan Cole still mopped the high school floors. But sometimes, when the light hit the mountains just right, he'd pause by the window and allow himself a small smile. The past was buried. The future was his. The end. Did Ethan make the right choice? Should he have kept the gold, or was justice more important? Let us know in the comments, and hit subscribe for more gripping tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary choices.